I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure.
Over the weekend, the world saw the Assad regime topple in Syria after rebels took control of Damascus. This has been described as a shock offensive, especially with just how quickly the regime fell after it has been in power for over half a century. So, Jonathan, to start off the conversation, could you give us the 30,000-foot view here? How did we get to this point?
Yes, I don't think it was in many people's bingo cards that the Syrian regime would fall as fast as it did and with as little resistance. They basically didn't put up a fight, and the rebels just drove through city after city. They started in the north, in Aleppo, and then Idlib, and then Hama, and then Homs, and then they were at the outskirts of Damascus, and then it was done. And the Syrian military just disintegrated. I think that the die was cast once Assad flew to Russia, and he came back understanding that he wouldn't be getting any substantial Russian support. And once he tried to reach out to multiple countries, including to Israel reportedly, but multiple other natural allies of Syria, of course, the Iranians and other countries begging for help, nobody wanted to. Then I think he understood, and his military understood, that this was game over, and the military started to retreat and disintegrate. That is probably the main reason why it happened so fast, and I must say, very surprisingly. I don't think that any Western intel organization really knew and assessed that it would be such a free fall and it would take so little time. Now we are in a totally different Middle East with lots of options, lots of opportunities for the West, and quite a few threats.
So let's talk about this totally different landscape in the Middle East, because the military in Syria, as you said, completely disintegrated as the rebels drove through. Assad has fled, so now who is in charge of Syria?
So, what's interesting, very interesting this time, usually revolutions, they are usually bloody and violent. What we're seeing out of Syria currently, I think the rebels are working really hard to try for there to be a semblance of an orderly passage of control of the country, which I think is very interesting. There are no mass executions. They've just notified, I read, that they are going to pardon the active members of the Syrian military, that they're not looking to, start executing people. And they've also issued guidance to their fighters. The rebels have issued guidance to their soldiers and rank and file not to be violent against minorities, Christians and Druze and Kurds and others. So there's interesting things that are happening, which I think are relatively positive. Who's in charge? The main man is the leader of an organization called HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Front for the Liberation of Syria. They are a Turkish-supported, US-designated terror organization, which is kind of awkward and inconvenient because now the US has to reevaluate if that definition stands. He's in charge, and he is leading the transition. He has so far kept in position current Syrian government ranking members, and he wants them to kind of do the transition in a smooth delivery of power. And it'll be very interesting to see what they will say the future will be. If they're going to call elections, which is a very remote possibility, but that could be a pleasant surprise, or if they're going to say, now we are in power and we are going to implement Sharia, strict Muslim law. I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the rebels, most, if not all, are Sunni jihadists. Their outlook on life is a very strict and radical interpretation of Islam. These are not freedom fighters in the democratic sense, but these are people who believe that the only way to live is by the Quran and a very strict interpretation of it. But we'll see how that meets reality, and it's very sensitive days now in Syria.